Hey, y'all, thanks for joining us for another one of our roundtable discussions. I'm Jordan Kavuma. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Prima, and today we are going to be talking about the future of batch brewing. So I'm joined by some really sharp people today in the world of coffee, so I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves.
My name is Ryan. I am the product manager here at Prima.
And my name is Steve. I'm one of the content creators here.
I'm Eli. I'm the co-founder and CEO of the Ground Control Batch Brewer.
I'm Jeff Guerin. I run sales and business development for Ground Control.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. We're really excited to be able to talk with you today. So I just want to start off by asking, in general, how do you feel like batch brewing expectations have changed within the last 5 to 10 years in a cafe, as far as a customer is concerned, as well as maybe even a cafe owner and what they hope to get out of their batch brewer?
Absolutely. I think that to understand how batch brewing expectations have changed in the last 5 to 10 years, we really want to look at what's been happening in the coffee industry over the last 20 to 30 years and how it's trickled down to batch brewing, which has become a very important part of cafes' operations. So the overarching concept here is that everything turns on the customer experience. And that's what we really discovered in the late 70s and early 80s as espresso machines started to make their way into American cafes. People want not just some brown liquid, but they want to have something that's delicious and memorable and a special experience, either time with their friends or their family in a cafe. And that's really, I think, what's driven the coffee industry for the past 30 years. Now, with the proliferation of espresso machines and expertise in espresso, what we really started to see is an explosion of interest in quality, led by what some may call the third wave coffee movement, which really began in earnest in the 90s. And originally there was the focus on the sourcing and roasting of the coffee and new types of roasting profiles that weren't previously seen, at least in the United States. But what started to happen is in the mid 2000s, we saw the introduction of the Clover single cup brewer, which won the best new product at SCA and transformed the way people thought about filter coffee in America. People discovered that just like with espresso, filter coffee could really be an experience that could be delivered at a certain level of scale in American cafes. And that's what this interest in thinking about the logical conclusions of that with drip brewing and batch brewing generally. So since the Clover launched, people have been trying, and maybe even actually much earlier than the Clover launch, people have been trying to really get the most out of their batch brewers, which traditionally has been drip brewers. The automated drip brewer was launched in 1954. And other than pulse brewing and some really interesting innovations by Marco in heating technology, and now also by Tone, we haven't seen a lot of changes to the architecture of batch brewers, traditionally drip based. And with that comes a lot of limitations in terms of what you can do with your coffee, the level of TDS you can hit, and the types of parameters that you can change, as well as consistency. With the launch of Ground Control in 2016 at SCA in Atlanta, what we've aimed to do is to bring a new dimension to batch brewing that addresses a lot of these questions that have been posed by single cup brewing. Can you create a cup brewer that is also a batch brewer, so something that can go anywhere from 1 cup to, let's say, up to a gallon of coffee, that could produce something that's exceptional every time and really change what people have traditionally viewed as the experience in batch brewing, away from a typical drip experience to something that maybe is a little bit more multifaceted or interesting, both for the customer in terms of the visual experience, as well as what you get in the cup and the variety of beverages that you get in the cup, not just hot filter coffee. We've started to see this also with drip brewers like the Hipster exploring cold brew in a batch brewing system. And one thing that we've been really seeing demand for as well is exploring batch iced lattes and other types of specialty drinks that were not traditionally in the domain of batch brewers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's right. There hasn't really been a lot of innovation within batch brew for a long time. I think there's been a focus on user experience, but in terms of like quality in the cup, it's been pretty stagnant for a lot of years. And there hasn't been any major new approaches to batch brew. And that's one reason we're really excited about ground control is it offers as much variable control as some of the best home espresso machines out there in different ways, but the same amount of possibilities are available to the user.
What do you think from a customer's perspective? So you have the professionals within the coffee industry, and they know kind of the boundaries that you can push when it comes to batch brew. They know what's possible and maybe what you could achieve, but we're not there yet. But when you think of a customer who is walking into a cafe and trying to decide between today's brew and a latte, what do you think their expectations are? What goes into that decision making for the customer to choose between those two options?
You want to touch on that?
Well, that's a tough question, because I think in some part we are kind of so far on we are customers, of course, but we're so far, we're thinking about this kind of stuff all the time. So the advances in technology and what you can get out of coffee, and we sometimes use the refractometer to measure what we can get out of a coffee, right, for extraction. And customers aren't thinking in those terms, but they do want, I think, more so now you're seeing, I think more customers want a delicious cup of coffee than before. They just kind of wanted caffeine maybe, or they wanted something that tasted maybe more on the darker roast side of things. So when you start pushing toward light roast, I think the imperfections in coffee with a batch brew that isn't where it should be there's a big difference, I think. So I think it's becoming more important to customers.
Yeah.
One thing that I'll add too is we've seen COVID transform the customer expectation of the coffee experience in the cafe. You want customers, we see now that customers want an exceptional cup of coffee, and they want that experience when they're ordering the cup, but they want to be in and out in a minute. But in many places, people don't want to linger in cafes, especially older people or people who are at risk. They want to still have that experience, and they're going to the cafe, they're spending the money, and they want something memorable, but they can't spend the 30 to 60 minutes that they used to for their daily cup of coffee in many instances in the cafe. So being able to deliver a really memorable, high quality cup and to be able to serve that in 10 seconds rather than, I would say the quickest single cup method, from order to receipt is about 2 minutes. And then, of course, it gets much longer than that in some instances. So being able to do that has been very important during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I think traditional batch brew has also lacked a visual appeal, whereas with espresso, you see a craftsman preparing a drink. They're tamping, dosing, steaming that milk, and pouring latte art for you. And batch brew is required, really no skill from the customer's perspective. And with something like ground control, there's a really interesting process happening that they can see, and that can make it more appetizing and more interesting for a customer.
Definitely. One of the things that's really interesting that we've learned over the years is that for many customers, they don't necessarily understand the nuances of coffee brewing or why you would brew coffee one way versus another. They tend to think of coffee a little bit like instant chocolate or something like that, powdered hot cocoa, where you just add the powder and the water and mix it, and then you have a drink. And so with our brewer, when people see that, the coffee is in the bulb and there's all this theater, they want to know, why are you doing that? Is this just for show, or is it making a better cup of coffee? And that really sets up the barista very nicely to explain the science of brewing in a way that is relatable to the customer, and to explain the care that the cafe is taking in producing that cup. So I think that the visual and the theater is part of the education that's so important in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving, maybe shifting from the customer and thinking more now to the cafe owner. So someone making purchasing decisions, trying to think through bar flow, trying to think through what piece of equipment is going to best serve their cafe. What have y'all found maybe in talking with different cafe owners? And then if y'all have had any conversations as well as to the language or the pain points that are being brought out when you're talking to owners in regards to batch brewing?
So one thing that comes up is, how much to brew and when. It's a batch brewer, as in most drip systems are. But how much control do you have over the size of that batch? So if you're limited to one or two sizes, that could work very well. But there's also the opportunity for that to kind of force you to overbrew, therefore wasting coffee. Or on the other hand, having your coffee sit out too long because you had to brew 1.5 gallons and you only needed half a gallon. Another thing that we see come up is the expertise required to dial in coffees consistently on a batch brewer, and how many people and who that is on their staff that can accomplish that effectively. One thing that pops up quite a bit is like the taste factor. It's like, is it just a batch brewer? And I would say and this is clearly like going back to the ground control here, but we're not implying that you cannot make good coffee off of a traditional drip system. That's clearly not the case. But it's the level of control that you have over that extraction. Kind of by design with the drip system, you're somewhat limited on the factors you can control. And I would say it's not that most cafe owners are staying up at night like my batch coffee sucks, like my business is going down. But I think it's the exception rather than the norm that those owners are feeling that their batch brew is living up to its full to its potential. Like for the coffees they're using, is that as good as it can be? And if the answer is no, to us, that's a big problem.
Yeah. So kind of stepping off of that, then, if just to offer up maybe something helpful, maybe someone is watching this and they're trying to think through this scenario for themselves. What are some questions that you think that a cafe owner should maybe even ask themselves when looking at the landscape, the options when it comes to batch brewing and trying to decide which piece of equipment is right for their specific situation?
I think every cafe owner has to ask themselves first and foremost, what is the batch brewer achieving in my business, right? It's when you look at the modern cafe, there's usually 2 to 3 pieces of equipment that drive the coffee program. There's the batch brewer, there's the espresso machine, and whatever you happen to be using for cold brew. There are some fairly sophisticated cold brew solutions on the market today, but usually that decision is fairly straightforward decision for most cafes in terms of what they're going to do for cold brew. So really, we're talking about how are you investing your technology and brewing budget between your espresso machine and your batch brewer, and how are those decisions going to impact your business? We see a lot of cafes making very meaningful investments in their espresso machine, and we think that's very wise because a lot of drinks are espresso based, and communicating and telegraphing to the customer that you care about quality and that you're investing in technology that makes consistency possible is very important. And I think that in the cafe realm, we have 30 years of experience in understanding and realizing that investing in espresso equipment is very shrewd. In the batch brewer space, up until ground control was launched, there really wasn't a premium option for batch brewers where you could start thinking about meaningfully investing in a batch brewer and getting the kind of value out of your investment that you might get out of an espresso machine. Obviously we have a lot of respect for the existing batch brewer companies, the legacy companies, and they build, very well made products. And I think that they would be the first to agree that these are products where they're meant to go into a variety of scenarios, and there are very sharp competitive pressures among the three major manufacturers that really are causing these products to be priced and manufactured in a way where the price point can appeal to a very large audience. And so in terms of premium features, we've gotten a lot of feedback from customers over the year that there really aren't, or at least before ground control, there really weren't that many premium features in batch brewers that would be viewed as a business investment that could help grow your business and create new types of functionality that didn't exist before. I would say, if your cafe is not necessarily focused on quality, consistency, or really investing in that batch experience, and there are a number of places where maybe the customer doesn't get to see the brewer, or you have a captive audience where the quality might be less important. I mean, I think we're seeing less and less of that today, but there's certainly contexts like that where a drip brewer might make sense. And obviously also there are businesses where the investment in something like a ground control, you can't immediately quantify in certain contexts, especially in new cafes where there are smaller budgets. You can't necessarily quantify what that investment will get you. With that being said, what I would say is when you're evaluating a batch brewer, the feedback we've received from our customers is existing drip brewers, for the most part, tend to be similar in their functionality, and we all know what they're providing. If you would like to look at enhancing the scope of features and potentially having that come back to support your business, we've got now batch brewing technologies like the ground control, where you could do very rapid low temperature brew that can replace a traditional cold brew and produce a very similar flavor profile. We found that we now have several hundred customers that either incorporated that into their menus or are currently looking at adopting and incorporating that. And that's been a game changer for them because it's been an increase in quality on their what they had traditionally been serving as a cold brew. It's immediately visible in flavor profile as something that's very similar, if not identical, to a traditional cold brew. And also, you never run out of cold brew. So that's been very meaningful for our customers versus traditionally some customers will only make cold brew once a week, or they'll need someone that has a very high skill level to produce that cold brew so that it's consistent. Maybe it's the manager that needs to make it, and that's quite a time commitment. So being able to take that process and give it to someone who is just day one at the cafe, and to know that they're going to produce something exceptional is very valuable. That's something that I would say is definitely a decision point for cafe owners. The other thing that we're starting to see with batch brewers, both with the ground control, and we've heard of other cafes even using traditional drip brewers to produce concentrates that can be used to make specialty beverages. So for example, I would say that 80% of our new customers are using ground control to produce batch iced lattes. We're talking about producing a very high TDS concentrate and a beverage whose final strength is similar, if not in some instances higher, than what you would get with a traditional espresso machine. That can be a game changer for a business that is doing a very large volume of ice latte, something that ground control has certainly been at the forefront of. So that with your batch brewer has a lot of business impact. Of course, as we discussed before, really thinking about the quality of your brewer and what your investment is getting you in terms of your quality and consistency is an important as well. I would say in some ways it's the most important factor. Your brand and your quality are very tightly intertwined. And the truth is that for most cafes, about 30 to 50% of the beverages that you sell are going to be off of your batch brewer. So making sure that when people drink that, you're presenting the best face of your brand. You spent so much time roasting, sourcing that coffee, or if you're buying your coffee from a roaster, finding that roaster partner that really takes that time and effort to really produce something very special. You want to make sure that you're sharing that with your customers consistently. The job isn't done till that coffee has been brewed and presented to the customer. And informally, we've heard from a lot of people that that a lot of, in terms of the supply chain and getting from the farm to the cup, oftentimes all the work that's put into that coffee can be lost at that last step if we're not really paying careful attention to how we're brewing that coffee. So with a solution like ground control, you can be pretty confident that every single time you're going to get the most out of that coffee, and you don't have to worry about who's on bar, or did you dial in that coffee right that particular day? Did the blend change? Exceptional every single time. And then, of course, the visual, I think that's a really important component, especially when you have people who are in the cafe and who are asking questions about why you're doing things the way you are and how are you taking things to the next level. In specialty coffee, there's always that cafe next door that's trying to take things one step further and really presenting a higher quality cup. And with something like batch brewing, we're seeing our customers outcompete meaningfully because the quality that they're presenting to the customer is just cannot be touched by other brewers in our experience. Of course, we're biased, but that's the feedback we've consistently received from our customers as well, that the quality that they're getting, we have a lot of customers that have transitioned from drip to ground control, that it's like nothing they've ever seen, both in their single cup and in their batch brewing, in some cases, we have customers who've been in the coffee industry for 30 plus years who are sharing that feedback with us.
Yeah. Well, you guys are a little less biased, but you've spent a lot of time with the ground control. So what are some of the things that you feel like have been most exciting or most interesting when testing the brewer and, tasting the coffee from it?
Yeah, for me, just how easy it is to dial in a great cup of coffee and how little fiddling it requires, even though all those controls are there in the ground control at your disposal. You can plug and play using the recommended settings that ground control sets out in the brewing guide, and pretty much get 95% of the way there to that ideal cup of coffee, and then make small adjustments from there. And then, those profiles can be saved. And when you're dialing in a new coffee, maybe just go back through those 2-3 profiles that have worked for you in the past, press one button, and you have different cups of coffee to compare. So it's much easier to hit that target of that ideal cup. There's much less fiddling around that's required with the ground control.
Yeah, and I think about just being a barista and how much activity is at the espresso machine, and how something like the ground control kind of frees that up so that you can kind of disperse, maybe a kegerator over here. Everybody is not just waiting for their drink from someone who's at the espresso machine or several people who's at the espresso machine. So I think from the barista standpoint, this is nice that it kind of distributes the action, behind the counter in a much more organic way. So I see that at least. Yeah.
One other thing is that ground control is capable of brewing in very precise amounts. So you can change in increments of 1 milliliter, if I'm not mistaken. And so, if you're slow, maybe in the afternoon, you can switch to something like a 500 milliliter batch, which is not something you can do with a traditional batch brew. Usually you get an option of like 3 liters or 1 gallon. Mm-hmm. And so you're brewing way too much. So it works for the barista in that way. It works for the cafe owner in that way economically. So you can brew that same quality cup of coffee and just vary the batch size throughout the day.
Yeah, because it takes out, when you're brewing on a regular drip machine or batch brewing machine, you're thinking too about like the bed depth. It might taste different when you have to go down to a smaller batch for any one coffee. So inconsistency could be an issue, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, I wanted to ask all of you, the last cafe that you went to that you had some batch brew coffee that you felt that it was just perfect. Do y'all have any memories of, can you call out your last favorite cup of coffee?
Well, it doesn't happen very often.
Yeah.
But I think my last excellent experience was in Los Angeles, and I went to Go Get 'em Tiger, which, you know, of course it was good, but it was an extremely memorable, just very thoughtful experience, and the batch brew was excellent.
Yeah, no, it's a very difficult question. I usually get espresso actually when I go
That's
out.
true. You're an
And-
espresso guy.
And, you know, I mean, we could say that the ground control, you know, maybe changes that in a way. I think the reason that I started getting espresso going out is because that was how you got in
The
my
good
opinion,
coffee.
the better, you know, the better flavors. So, yeah. We can throw it to you too. I mean, not just on us. you
Yeah.
know,
Where have y'all
Ellie,
been
Jeff.
lately that the coffee really impressed you?
Absolutely. Well, I'm not going to talk about a ground control customer because I want to just share an authentic experience that is outside of anywhere where I'd be biased.
Yeah.
But I did have a cup of one of Tim Wendelbo's Kenyan coffees, brewed on a Beacon brewer actually at the Ferry Building in San Francisco. So there's a co-working space that is partnered with Tim, and I could say that was a really beautiful coffee. I really appreciated that experience because this co-working space talked about how Tim and his team had personally worked with them to set everything up and to produce this exceptional cup of coffee. And that's something that to me was very meaningful. When you walk in somewhere and you don't necessarily have any kind of expectation, and suddenly you're like, wow, a lot of thought went into this, a lot of intentionality, and they really delivered something that is outstanding. And that's the kind of experience that we hope every kind of cafe could offer to their customers.
Yeah. What about you, Jeff? Anything?
Well, I'm going to take the biased route and take one of our customers. But, we have a spot up in Sacramento called Pause Coffee, and they're actually an Onyx Wholesale customer. But I stopped off there with my wife on a trip and brought her in, and she's definitely not a black coffee drinker. I had her take a sip, and she was absolutely floored how good it was.
Wow.
And that was very good validation for me as well. That they're using our machine to its capacity, and it's cool to be wowed by an experience at one of our locations too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, we appreciate you guys taking the time. I hope this was helpful for everybody. We actually have quite a few videos coming out about the ground control, how to use it, an overview, some different recipes or videos on dialing in the ground control for its different use cases. We'll make sure that we keep the description of this video updated with links to all of those. If you have any questions, make sure that you drop them in the comments. Is there anywhere that people could follow you guys with ground control, or even personally, to keep up with anything new you have coming out?
Absolutely. One of the things that we're really grateful for is our community of very dedicated ground control fans that reach out to us regularly. We've had people who love our product who've asked, like, how can we invest, and where can we find it? How can we help people get in front of the machine? So we appreciate all of that. What I would say is, first, for starters, on our website, if you go to the customers section, there's a map that has a lot of our current customers on it. So you can find out where you could try a ground control closest to you. We're also very good about responding if people reach out over our website. Even if you're just a fan, we love hearing from you. Let us know. Of course, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. Our Instagram is ground, GROUND, control, but without the final O. So it's CONTRL. So ground, CONTRL. And we just really appreciate the support. We're growing quite a bit, but we're still also, we're at a point where we rely strongly on our community, and we're also building a community of people who really believe in what we're doing. So if you're out there and you want to show your support or enthusiasm, it's really meaningful to us. Just shoot us a line.
Great. We'll make sure we link to all of that in the description, though, so that people can easily find you guys. Again, thank you for taking the time to chat with us. And if you are watching this and you want to learn more about how to get your hands on ground control, you can go over to primacoffee.com. We have it over there, and we're more than happy to talk to you about any questions that you have. So thanks for watching, and y'all have a great day.
See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.